Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're diving into something really fascinating, political innovation, you could say. We're looking at the Central Tibetan Administration, the CTA, and specifically the document that really makes it all possible, the Charter of Tibetans-in-Exile.
That's right.
Now, most of us know the CTA, as the government in exile up in Dharamsala, India.
Yeah.
But what our sources really hammer home is that this isn't like just a humanitarian group or some political lobby.
No, neither.
This is a government. It's got a whole multi-branch democratic governing structure.
Yeah.
So the real question we're exploring is, how on earth do you write an operating manual for a state when that state doesn't actually control any land?
That's exactly the puzzle, isn't it? And for you, the listener, what we've done is take the charter itself, which, let's be clear, it functions just like a constitution, and we've sort of woven it together with academic analysis. Looking at how the CTA actually maintains its survival as an organization, we're going beyond the headlines here, looking at the institutional scaffolding underneath it all.
Okay.
So our mission really is to understand the strategic thinking here. How does the CTA pull it off? How does it maintain its claim to be the sole representative of all Tibetans?
That includes people in Tibet too, right? Not just the diaspora.
Absolutely. Those under PRC rule and those scattered all over the world. And crucially, how did they successfully institutionalize a democracy that's built to last?
Yeah.
One that's independent of any single leader.
Yeah, I was really struck by just how detailed this whole setup is, for a government operating in absentia.
It's remarkably thorough.
Okay, so let's unpack this charter. Let's see how they manage this balancing act between ancient history and modern democratic institutions.
Place to start.
We really have to begin with the preamble, don't we? Because it's not just background fluff. It's used strategically. Legally, almost.
Yep.
The charter lays out this sweeping claim to Tibetan sovereignty. It traces a continuous line all the way back to Natrit Senpo, 2nd century BC?
That's the claim, right up to the 14th Dalai Lama.
Wow.
And look, they're not just telling a story here. They're laying down a legal argument, a claim to continuous statehood that they say was, violently interrupted.
By the Chinese invasion starting in 1949.
Exactly. And that moment of crisis, it forced the 14th Dalai Lama, who was only 16, to assume full political authority.
Right. And that crisis point, the sources detail this, it led straight to that infamous 17-point agreement in 1951.
Which they're very clear was signed under, immense duress, overwhelming pressure. And that agreement, it was formally repudiated, thrown out. In Tezpur, India, back in 1959, that's when His Holiness issued his proclamation.
Okay, so that proclamation is the basis, the legal mandate for the CTA.
That's the foundation, yes. It declares the CTA as the lawfully empowered sovereign entity, ready to administer and represent all Tibetans, both the diaspora and the millions still inside Tibet.
But the territory they claim, that's a massive point of contention, isn't it? They don't just claim the current Tibet Autonomous Region, the TAR, which is what Beijing recognizes.
Correct. That's a key distinction. The CTA claims the vast ethnographic definition of Tibet, what's known as Bochol Khasum.
Which includes?
The traditional provinces, Usang, Amdo, and Kham. We're talking about an area roughly twice the size of the current TAR.
Twice the size.
Yeah. And this claim isn't based on current administrative lines. It's rooted in shared ethnic and cultural identity. It deliberately sets the CTA's vision of Tibet completely at odds with the map Beijing uses.
Okay. And yet, despite this, maximalist territorial claim, the charter itself seems very focused on global acceptance. I'm thinking Articles 6 and 7.
Absolutely key.
They commit the CTA to respecting international law, abiding by the laws of host countries, and this really stood out, the explicit abjuration of war.
That's their core strategic positioning for getting international support. It's very deliberate.
How so?
By declaring that Tibet will be a zone of peace, nonviolence, that they won't use armed conflict. They frame the whole struggle differently. It's not presented as a military fight.
It's political human rights.
Exactly. It's a political and human rights issue. It's a moral argument really aimed squarely at, Western democracies and international bodies.
That focus on legitimacy, structural legitimacy, it comes through really strongly in how their democratic system evolved. And this is where the charter shows, incredible institutional resilience, doesn't it? That big shift in 2011.
Oh, that's where things get really interesting. The sources really emphasize this. The 14th Dalai Lama had always talked about wanting a democratic system, right?
Yeah, for decades.
But what he did in 2011 was, revolutionary is maybe not too strong a word. He decided to irrevocably give up all political and administrative authority.
All of it.
All of it. Think about how rare that is historically. You have this revered spiritual leader holding essentially total power, and he voluntarily hands it over. Why? To ensure the governing system survives beyond his own lifetime.
And I remember reading that the parliament in exile actually pleaded with him, right? Asked him to reconsider.
They did. They supplicated him, but he refused. He was insistent. The system had to rely on law, on institutions, not just on one person, however revered.
That's quite a statement.
It really is. It was like a deliberate inoculation, institutionally speaking, to prevent the movement from collapsing or splintering after he eventually passes.
So the political power now rests where?
It's fully vested in the Sikyong, that's the democratically elected political leader, and the Kashag, which is the cabinet of ministers.
Elected directly by the people.
Elected directly by the Tibetan people globally, yes. They handle all the functions of the head of government now.
Okay, so if the Sikyong is the political head, what role does the Dalai Lama actually keep, according to the charter? Is he just retired?
Not retired, no. Article 1 clarifies his retained role. He remains the protector and symbol of Tibet and Tibetan people.
Protector and symbol.
Right. His responsibility shifts. It's now about spiritual and ethical guidance, offering advice, and crucially, acting as the highest level international representative.
Ah, so meeting world leaders.
Exactly. Meeting global leaders, important figures. He lends the movement that immense moral weight and global recognition, while the Sikyong and the Kashag manage the day-to-day political administration.
That transition really set up a remarkably clear separation of powers, didn't it? It looks a lot like a standard parliamentary system.
It does.
Let's walk through that architecture they built.
Okay, the structure is quite classic, as you say.
Yeah.
You've got the executive. It's led by the Sikyong.
The elected leader.
Right. Supported by up to 7 Kalans. Those are the ministers who form the Kashag, the cabinet.
Okay.
And crucially, this Kashag is collectively responsible and accountable directly to the legislative branch, just like you'd see in, say, the UK or Canada.
Which brings us to the legislative branch itself.
Yeah.
The Tibetan parliament in exile, they have the sole power to draft and pass laws. 5-year terms. But the sources really highlight the composition of this parliament. That seems to be the real genius bit for keeping everyone unified.
It's absolutely the key mechanism. It ensures that no major regional group or religious faction feels left out or marginalized, which is vital when your population is scattered everywhere.
So how does it break down? Article 37, right?
That's the one. It lays it out clearly. 10 members each from the 3 traditional provinces, Utsang, Amdo, and Kham.
Equal representation for the big regions.
Exactly. And there's a mandate baked in.
Uh-huh.
At least 2 women elected from each of those provinces.
Oh, interesting. Affirmative action built right in.
Yes. Then you add the religious representation.
Right, the different schools of Tibetan Buddhism.
2 members each from the 5 major schools. And then this is vital for the global community. They include specific seats for the diaspora.
How does that work?
They elect members representing different regions globally. The Americas, Europe, and Africa combined, and then Asia and Australasia, excluding the immediate host countries like India and Nepal.
Wow. So that structure basically institutionalizes representation for every potential fault line, doesn't it? Region, religion, even where you live in the diaspora.
Precisely. It ensures everyone has a voice, a stake in Dharamsala. That must be incredibly powerful for securing loyalty from Tibetans living in, dozens of different countries.
Yeah, you can see how that builds legitimacy from within. It's like national cohesion without needing territory.
It's a foundation, a critical one.
Okay, so that's executive, legislative. What about the judiciary? The Supreme Justice Commission, what does it actually do? I mean, given they're operating inside India and other countries, how much real jurisdiction can a Tibetan court have?
That's a really sharp question, because its power is necessarily focused inward. It's about the CTA's own administration.
Okay.
It acts as the top court, the final court of appeal, for disputes within the CTA's framework.
Like what kind of disputes?
Well, interpreting the charter itself, for one. Resolving fights over how the administration works, service matters for CTA officials like employment disputes, and this is really important on the ground. Managing land and housing issues within the Tibetan settlements.
Ah, okay. So maybe they can't prosecute international law violations, but they can make sure housing is allocated fairly in a refugee settlement down in Karnataka, for instance.
Exactly. And that sounds small, but think about the stability that brings. It establishes the rule of law, fairness, transparency right there in the community. That's vital for everyday life.
And how are the judges, the commissioners, chosen?
They're elected by the parliament, actually, from a list nominated by a special committee. So again, reinforcing that separation of powers from the Sikyong and the Kashak.
And like any good democracy, they didn't forget the independent oversight bodies, did they? The sources mentioned those democratic safeguards.
Yes, absolutely crucial from the start. You see the essential pillars right there in the charter.
Like the Election Commission.
The Central Election Commission, yes, to manage fair elections, obviously. Then there's the Public Service Commission.
For hiring staff.
Exactly. For merit-based selection of CTA employees, trying to avoid patronage. And critically, the Office of the Auditor General.
To watch the money.
Precisely. To make sure every rupee, every dollar donated or allocated is properly accounted for. These institutions are vital. They help prevent corruption, sure, but they also secure confidence from international donors. And that's absolutely essential for a government that relies so heavily on contributions.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Let's talk about the principles behind this structure. The Charter isn't just about who does what. It's laying out a kind of social contract with Tibetan citizens, right? Chapter Rights and Duties. What really stands out there?
Well, you have the foundational things you'd expect. Equality before the law, freedom of religion, universal voting rights for citizens over 18, standard stuff. But they also explicitly secure those classic liberal rights. Freedom of movement, freedom of speech, peaceful assembly, and notably, they specifically ban child labor for kids under 14.
Okay, but the duty struck me as particularly interesting, especially for an exiled population. It's not just about, being loyal.
No, it's more active than that. Article 13 is really telling. Citizens have a duty to abide by the Charter, naturally. But also, and this is key, they must strive for the resolution of the cause of Tibet.
Actively work towards the goal.
Yes. And they must pay voluntary contributions in accordance with the relevant laws.
The money aspect again.
It has to be there.
Yeah.
They don't have a traditional tax base derived from territory or economic activity within borders. So this duty to contribute financially, it links patriotism directly to funding the administration and the cause.
That makes sense. I also thought the citizenship rules themselves were a really clever adaptation to being displaced. I mean, a constant headache for any exile group is how you handle citizenship when people are forced to take on new nationalities just to live somewhere.
Right. How do you stop the community from just dissolving into other nationalities over time?
Exactly.
Article 8 tackles this head-on. First, Tibetans born abroad, automatically citizens.
Yeah.
Simple.
Okay.
But here's the really crucial bit. A Tibetan does not have to give up their Tibetan citizenship if they take on the citizenship of another country because of, necessity. Exigency is the word they use.
As long as
they continue to fulfill their duties as a Tibetan citizen, like contributing, so they prioritize holding on to that national identity, that connection, over the usual strict rules about dual citizenship. It's pragmatic.
Very smart. Okay, finally, let's touch on the directive principles in Chapter 3. These seem less about the mechanics of government and more about showing the world and Tibetans themselves what the CTA actually stands for, its priorities beyond just politics.
That's a good way to put it. They signal values. For instance, Article 4 commits them explicitly to the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Which is a clear strategic move, right? Anchor themselves in that international human rights framework.
Absolutely. It boosts their legitimacy on the world stage.
And the priorities listed really show a focus on social welfare, which seems essential when you're dealing largely with a refugee population.
Definitely. They mandate things like equitable taxation, meaning those voluntary contributions should be fair, plus economic help for the poor and the chronically ill, and efforts to prevent economic exploitation within the community.
These are the practical things that build loyalty on the ground, aren't they? Taking care of people.
They're the tools that foster deep communal bonds, yes. And then there's education and culture, which are central to keeping the identity alive.
What does it say there? Article 17.
Right. Commits to the UN Declaration of the Rights of the Child, aims to gradually teach all subjects in the Tibetan language, a huge undertaking for cultural preservation, and promoting Tibetan Buddhism, but in its ecumenical non-sectarian form, trying to unify, not divide, based on religion.
That cultural continuity must be the absolute lifeblood of the movement over decades.
It is. Without it, what are you preserving?
And I was also really struck by the inclusion of a global perspective, even in these principles, specifically on the environment. Article 15.
Yes, that's quite forward-thinking.
Yeah.
It explicitly states that the CTA must direct efforts toward protecting the environment of the Tibetan Plateau.
Not just for Tibetans, but linking it outwards.
Exactly. That's a strategic move to connect the Tibetan cause to global ecological security. They argue, quite effectively sometimes, that protecting Tibet's environment, the source of major Asian rivers, the third pole, is actually everybody's business. It gives them another angle, another point of leverage internationally.
So wrapping this all up, what does this deep dive into the Charter really mean for you, the listener?
Well, it shows this isn't just a document. It's an incredibly detailed institutional blueprint. It transforms the CTA from what could have just been a political struggle into a really meticulously structured democratic government in exile. It provides that solid legal framework needed to stop fragmentation and maintain credibility internationally, generation after generation in exile. Yeah, you should now have a much clearer picture of the sophisticated tools the CTA uses, how they build that national loyalty through things like representation for everyone, social welfare programs, and how they chase international support through commitments to nonviolence, human rights, even environmentalism. It's essentially a modern operating manual for governance. Just, missing the chapter on controlling territory.
Fascinating stuff, really. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. The CTA seems to have cracked the code for running a democracy without a country. But the question remains, can they ever truly solve the problem of justice, of having laws that are fully enforceable without actual sovereignty on the ground?
That tension, right, between the legal aspiration laid out so clearly in the Charter and the hard geopolitical reality. That's the core challenge the CTA lives with every single day.
Well, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. We really hope this look inside the Charter helps you understand this unique political landscape a bit better.
Hope so.
We'll see you next time.